Chatnite Africa. Welcome to Chatnite. Chatnite Africa. Welcome to Chatnite. We bring you good vibe. We shine on the light. Welcome to Chatnite. We bring you good vibe. We shine on the light. We all over the world. Chatnite Africa. We all over the world. Chatnite Africa. Welcome to Chatnite. We bring you good vibe. We shine on the light. Welcome to Chatnite. We bring you good vibe. We shine on the light. We all over the world. Chatnite Africa. We all over the world. Chatnite Africa. Welcome to Chatnite, the only place that we give you good vibes. Chatnite Africa.
Chatnite Africa. Let's gang up, change mindset, and empower Africans. Are you ready? Africa to the world.
And now, live from the headquarters of Chatnite Africa, Divine Shamika.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to this week's edition of Voices of Africa on Chatnite. Today, you and the law. The United States is the single most sought-after destination for asylum seekers. Perhaps because of its political freedoms, perhaps because of its economic opportunities. We therefore see immigrants drown in high seas or killed by wild cats in South American jungles as they attempt to find a place in the sun. I can therefore assume that you have so many questions. You have so many questions, and for good reasons. If you illegally got into the United States and got married to a citizen, would that easily help you get a green card? Just because you flee from an armed conflict country, does that qualify you for political asylum? In what circumstances could your green card or even citizenship be revoked? Remember, ignorance of the law is no excuse. Ladies and gentlemen, you can tell that this show will be as instructive as it will be exhilarating. And to make it worth your time, I invited one of the leading U.S. immigration attorneys in the Washington, D.C. metropolitan area to take my questions, but also yours. Ladies and gentlemen, join me now in welcoming lawyer Danielle Beach on the platform.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Divine. Thank you, Divine, for having me on this show. There's a lot to be said. There's a lot of new things. Every week brings new challenges, new cases, new information. So I'm happy to discuss whatever questions you may have also. I've been doing this for about 30 years, since 1990. So in that amount of time, obviously, I've gained a lot of experience across the board, working with many different immigration agencies, State Department, ICE, Department of Homeland Security, Immigration and Naturalization Services, and many others.
She has said it herself. She has 30 years of experience to her credit. I have to also say that Danielle Beach has represented clients from over 95 countries across the globe. Once again, Danielle, we are happy to have you on Voices of Africa on Chatnite. My social media platforms manager is Mr. Roger Fool. He is producing this broadcast on different platforms across the globe, live from Lagos, Nigeria. My director of transmission is Mr. Mumbalingwa. Thank you guys for making this platform look the way it does. My name is Divine Chamakong. I am anchoring this broadcast from Washington, D.C. metropolitan area. Danielle, let's start with what makes news. The U.S. Supreme Court recently backed the Biden administration's decision about immigrants actually processing asylum cases when inside the United States rather than from Mexico, as it obtained during the Trump administration. Please, could you throw light on that?
So the MPP program has been, it was very active during Obama's time. And then again, Biden, there were challenges, but basically what it did was it was allowing for people who would come in across the border. And it used to be that, especially from Africa, people did not come across the border through Mexico. Then suddenly a lot of people started coming through Mexico, people from Central America, the children, and then Africans. And it became a much easier way to come across the border. And those people were considered to have come in illegally. So what would happen is you would be stuck in Mexico and you would be in a hotel, maybe for months, sometimes 3 or 4 months, and you could not get across the border to be interviewed by an asylum officer. You were interviewed by CBP, but you were not allowed to come into the United States. So what that did was that it resulted in people not being able to be qualified for asylum because they said there's a third country bar, because everybody who was coming obviously was coming from going through about 10 different countries. You know, they would come across Costa Rica, Panama, Nicaragua, et cetera, et cetera. So they would say, therefore, you're not eligible for asylum, but you're only going to be eligible for withholding. So that's what was happening. Well, thank God, this administration has taken a step on that, and now people can be interviewed right away and not have to wait. Because sometimes people would say, well, the judges would say, well, we don't know anyway that you have been here waiting for this interview because you couldn't get the little CHAD chip that you need with a number that you had to go through some clinic to get. So there were lots and lots of problems with this program.
Danielle, who has the authority to make immigration laws? And is it the U.S. Congress, the President of the United States, or state governors? Let me repeat the question. Who has the authority to make immigration laws? The U.S. Congress, the President of the United States, or state governors?
So that sounds like a very simple question. It's actually a really complicated question, because typically Congress would have the right to make immigration laws for years and years and years. And Congress would pass these laws, and then they'd become regulations, and they'd become statutes. But then what happened was that all immigration law is federal. So it's imposed by the federal government and codified by regulation and statute. But then this started with probably the most with Obama, but it had started before, and there was executive orders. And these orders that were made by the president to circumvent and get around not having a law. So for example, perfect example was the children who would come across and they would be eligible for work permits, which affected millions of people, and mostly Central American people who'd been here for 10 years or 12 years. They established a date, and they said, if you came in before this date in 2007, you could now apply for what the program was called was DACA, Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals. So they said at that time, they said, we're also going to do a DAPA, which is Deferred Action for Parent Arrivals. That never happened, never went through. But DACA did. And so DACA was able to bring in a lot of people who were already here, children called dreamers. And you've all heard the term dreamers. They were people who sometimes their parents had brought them over since they were 2 years old. They were able to get a work permit and get to colleges and get, actually become functional and not in the shadows anymore. So you have those executive orders. Well, executive orders have been pursued then in mass by Trump and now again by Biden, who is doing executive orders. So problem with an executive order is it only lasts usually the life of that president. After that, it's gone. So, they have sunset provisions. So there's a lot of things that have sunset provisions, including, say, for example, non-ministerial religious workers. That just got approved to renew so that now people can apply again. So that's one thing. And then you talk about the states. So states can make laws. So what's interesting about that is, so for example, Biden says, okay, I'm going to do this enforcement priorities. People are not going to be just shipped out and a charter plane hired and people gone from one day to another just because they had a decision by a judge or ICE and they were ordered deported. Only certain categories of people are going to be priorities. People who have criminal records, people who are terrorists, people who have, committed crimes of some kind, and so on and so forth. Well, unfortunately, June 10, 2022, Judge Drew Tipton of the U.S. District Court in Southern District of Texas decided, no, that's not going to be our priorities anymore. So what that means is that he canceled that Mayorkas memo, which was what Biden had done. So now that means that as of June 24, 22, they can pick up people again who have final orders. That's a big negative. It's a really scary thing for a lot of people who have been here many years, maybe are married to Americans, maybe have kids, and now they're going to be subject again to possibly being deported. So that leads you to what protects you from that deportation question, which could be a number of different things. For Cameroonians, it's going to be TPS. So
the Biden administration in April 2000, yes, the Biden administration in April 2022 granted temporary protective status to Cameroonians, as would be expected. And you know a lot about Cameroon, Danielle Beach. Spin doctors went to work, giving it all kinds of interpretations to fit their narratives. My question to you, ma'am, how is the temporary protective status to be understood to mean?
Okay, so temporary protected status is nothing new. It's something that has existed for many years, but it's given to certain select countries. And those countries are selected according to whether or not they have basically turmoil, civil strife, safety issues. So there's maybe a handful of countries that have it. So Sudan, recently Afghanistan, recently Ukraine, and most recently Cameroon. So each temporary protected status has rules of its own. So for example, say El Salvador. So El Salvador and Guatemala and Nicaragua, they had TPS for a period of time. El Salvador still has it, and it's been since 1990. So that can be renewed, I think, every 18 months or so. They can renew it, or they can cancel it, or they can let it expire. So what they said was anyone who has been here since April 14, 2022 from Cameroon, I'm speaking specifically about Cameroon now, would be eligible for TPS. But they had to show two things. They had to show that they had been physically present, and they had to show that they were also residing continuously. So those two things sound like they're almost the same, but they're not really the same. So if you didn't come in before April 14, 2022 in the US, you're definitely not going to be eligible for TPS. If you're not a Cameroonian, you're definitely not going to be eligible for TPS in Cameroon. So you have to show that you're a national of that country. So the question is, well, what if you're a dual national? So we are doing some dual nationals, which is an interesting question. Why should they get protected? Because they have another nationality that they could go to, another country they could go to. So other things that limited TPS was they said, well, if you have certain things can disqualify you. So for example, if you have a criminal record and you have 2 crimes, those would disqualify you. If you have been involved in any persecution of someone else, if you have been involved in any terrorist activities, if you've been involved in, and the list goes on and on. I can check my list because I have not.
And as you check, when you say if you've been involved in any terrorist activity, does it mean terrorism against the United States or against a different country?
So any kind of terrorism. So, so for example, if you've been convicted of any felony or 2 misdemeanors, so a felony or 2 misdemeanors in the U.S., you're not qualified. If you've been found to be inadmissible, you have to be admissible because of security or criminal issues, then you're not eligible. That's a complicated question. So that's not one I can answer right now. There's kind of fact specific. If you have been subject to any mandatory bars. So say, for example, you applied for asylum and you were denied, and they denied you because they said you had triggered the terrorist bar, then you would not be eligible. If you, the thing to remember about TPS too is when you're proving continuous presence, what do you do with people who are living with their parents, who don't have a lease agreement, who don't have a bank account, or maybe the parents living with the child, who don't have really any proof that they were here April 14. So that becomes an interesting challenge because maybe they've been here for 10 years, but they never got a bank account. They never got a lease agreement. They just basically depend on their kids for everything. And I had a lady come in yesterday who was in that situation, and she really didn't have anything to prove that she'd been here since April 14th. So then, you know, that requires some creative thinking, and how are you going to get around that? You know, because your typical avenues of proof are not going to be there.
It seems to me that there were a lot of misunderstandings about the TPS. What even some of the lawyers did not quite get this right. What, in your view, were misunderstood about the TPS?
Well, there's several things that were misunderstood. Let me start with a case that came out in 2020. And that case was ZRZC. That case said, you know what? If you came in on TPS, you're not going to be considered admitted into the US if you got TPS. So say you got deported, or you came in without entry, without inspection, like people coming across the border, or you didn't come in on a visitor's visa. They said, you're not going to be considered admissible. So if you get TPS, okay, you can get that travel document and travel, not to your home country, but you can travel. Okay, but when you travel and you come back, you're going to be stuck in that same status before you left. So say your visitor's visa expired 3 years ago. You're going to be inadmissible because you're going to have no status. So then you couldn't travel. So then they basically took away the whole thing about being able to travel. July 1st changed that. And they actually got rid of that AAO case and said, no, that's not going to be the situation now. People with TPS can travel. But if you're inadmissible, beware, sort of. That's what kind of the case says. So basically, people shouldn't just say, okay, I'm going to travel because I have TPS now. And TPS, remember, is only good for 18 months. So if your TPS has expired, you're definitely not going to be eligible to travel.
What are the chances that it could be renewed? What factors play in favor of it being, 1, granted, or 2, renewed? So
Cameroonians have for many years to get TPS. Many years they've talked about that. They've tried to get TPS. and it's never happened. They've lobbied for it. They've asked for it. So I just, about 3 months ago, I met with, and most of you know that Jill Biden, our president's wife, teaches at Nova Community College. Well, I deal with Nova Community Colleges in many different aspects, and one of them brings me in contact with her. And so I talked to her afterwards and told her, I appreciated that, that they had done this finally because I had mentioned it to her before that, that would be a good thing that, if that could happen. So TPS is what will renew it? Well, like I said, some countries get it for long periods of time. Sometimes that's political because like in Nicaragua, we made mistakes. We did some things that we didn't think were that good. And maybe, we needed to compensate. So that was a political move. But what the other main factor that continues TPS, like Sudan has had TPS for quite a while. Sierra Leone had it for quite a while, and then they lost it.
I think Liberia too did.
But then when they got Ebola, they got it again for a year. So it could be a disease, it could be a flood, so some kind of natural disaster, it could be the political situation. So I thought the TPS one for Cameroon was written very well because it said, that political turmoil and the inability to live. And what I thought was most interesting about it was that unlike other TPSs, where usually TPS is countrywide and you can't live in any part of that country because without being safe, that's not always true with Cameroon, right? So with Cameroon, it's really 2 provinces out of 10, the Northwest, Southwest province. Maybe the other cases, if you're a Francophone, you're probably not going to have a problem. But they didn't even think about that or talk about that. So that's TPS is for Cameroonians, whether you're a Francophone, Anglophone, whatever you are, as long as you're Cameroonian. So that's kind of a nice little loophole that somebody got through and nobody noticed.
Let's be clear about it. As I said, when the Biden administration granted the TPS, that is the temporary protective status for Cameroonians, people got to spinning these things. The situation in Cameroon, there's an armed conflict in Anglophone Cameroon. And those leaders of the conflict, military armed conflict, said, oh, yeah, this is a signal that the United States government has endorsed our fight for independence. Does TPS mean that?
It doesn't mean that at all. So the U.S. typically doesn't get very involved in African affairs unless there's a lot of riches there. So you can remember the situation in Rwanda and DRC, and that sounds a little negative perhaps, but U.S. does typically, unless there's some basic reason that's going to be other than humanitarian, which humanitarian is usually the one we say, but they're not going to come in. They didn't come in Rwanda till, very, very late and stop a genocide. So they're not going to come in and support the Anglophones. It's just not going to happen.
What's the difference? What's the difference between an illegal immigrant and an undocumented immigrant? Do they mean the same thing? Or one is for political correctness?
I think one is politically correct. So people don't like to be called, especially illegal aliens, which is the term that's derogatorily used. An illegal alien or an illegal immigrant or a undocumented. So undocumented can be slightly different. So someone who's undocumented could be someone from Mexico or one of the Central American countries who came without a passport. Maybe they don't know exactly where they're from. Maybe they have no documentation, whatever. But typically they're pretty synonymous, undocumented or illegal. It's basically the same thing. If your visitor's visa expired, obviously you're in a much better position to get a green card other ways than if you came in across the border illegally, which is an unlawful entry. And people say, no, I didn't come unlawfully. I presented myself to immigration. They kept me jailed there, and then they questioned me, and then they let me, talk to a judge, and then I got out. And but it's still an illegal entry, so it doesn't give you status. So it is not a status. DACA is not a status. TPS is not a status. there are many things that don't give you status. They are a form of relief, which is different than status.
If the situation in Cameroon changes, is there the possibility, Danielle, that the temporary protective status could be revoked or cancelled?
It won't be revoked. It just won't be renewed. It won't be extended. So every TPS has a sunset period and has to be extended. So could it be that there'd be advocates who'd say, yes, situations calm down, there's no problems now? A lot of it depends on, every year there's a human rights report that comes out on every country, including Cameroon. And it talks about what the human right abuses are. So, a lot of people feel that the human right abuses since 2017, particularly for Anglophones, have gotten much worse than they were previously. I went there in 2016 and I didn't think it was bad at all, but then again, I'm not Cameroonian. So, I'm not going to be subject to the same problems as someone else. But I think it's always been there. I mean, since 1984? I mean, it's been there a long time, some of these human right abuses. And typically, the American government does consider that the Biya regime has committed a lot of human right abuses. It's interesting, if you go to France, he's see his picture of when he was 30 years old posted on, in Paris, I saw his picture and I was like, that's him like 50 years ago. How is that? So not every country necessarily thinks that, but I think in America, that's kind of been a general feeling that he is, that it's a human right dictatorship in many ways.
Is there a possibility, given your experience, that the United States government could get involved in helping resolve the conflict in Cameroon?
I think that is slim to none.
Why so?
Okay, so what's the U.S. interest in doing that? It's like we haven't gone in Ukraine, and we have much more interest in going and setting foot there. So I don't think that the U.S. would ever go in there to help Cameroon. They haven't for 30 plus years. And I don't see that happening. There's not a mass genocide in Cameroon. There are villages being burned and people being killed and a lot of problems. But again, Cameroon is a breadbasket for Africa. So they have a lot of resources, but mostly food resources. Maybe they have rubber. They have some gasoline in the north, petroleum and stuff. But it's not a gold or oil super rich country that it's also a very small country. So I don't think that the U.S. has ever even thought about having any interest in getting involved. And we typically don't. Our Constitution and our case law sort of prevents us getting involved in a lot of government problems that are internal.
You are watching Voices of Africa on the platform Chatnite Africa.
We love Chatnite Africa. Keep watching Chatnite Africa.
Now that you are watching Chatnite Africa and the broadcast Voices of Africa, we will step into the area of asylum seeking in the United States. As I said in my introduction, the United States is the single most sought after destination for asylum seekers on the planet, perhaps because of the economic opportunities, perhaps because of the political freedoms. And because of that, you see people embark on perilous trips, some through South American jungles, attacked by wildcats like lions and tigers, some drown in fast-flowing streams, some are killed by the human traffickers. And then those who make their way to the United States, some get denied asylum. The question I have for you, the first question related to this, Danielle, is, does the simple fact that somebody is fleeing from an armed conflict or from a country with armed conflict, you have Burkina Faso, you have Nigeria, you have Ethiopia, you have so many African countries, does that qualify somebody for asylum in the United States?
Not at all. So TPS and asylum are two completely different things. And it's very important to understand that. Because if you see the statute and the way it's written for TPS, you can argue, well, that means that people who are Anglophones as a particular social group for asylum should be granted asylum because of what's happening. So I have won that argument with one judge in California about a month ago. That's not an argument I would present here on the East Coast as a sole argument for asylum because I think it would lose. It's not an argument that should be presented by a good lawyer. I took over this case on appeal. The case had already been done by the judge, so I was kind of stuck with that because the judge had already found that my client, who was not then my client, was not credible because she had not testified credibly. That means the judge didn't believe her. So I was stuck with that one argument. That was the only argument I had that I could use because she'd sort of destroyed her case in every other way, which I'm glad we were able to win.
Why wouldn't, I mean, everybody knows, and I'm sure the judges know, the defending lawyers know what's happening in Anglophone Cameroon. And why wouldn't that constitute a winnable argument?
Because
when people are
not
being
all
killed,
Anglophones are being persecuted just because they're Anglophones, number one.
Would you say
So
that,
it's
please?
basically
Say that again.
Anglophones.
Say that again, please.
Not all Anglophones are persecuted just because they're Anglophones. So some might be persecuted because they also are politically active against the CPDM, but not just solely because they're Anglophone, number one. Number two, there's a case called Matter of R, which says all asylum must be countrywide. That means that you cannot have a situation where you say, okay, I'm not safe living in the Northwest, Southwest province. Then the judge says, well, then the government shows it's a rebuttable presumption. Can you live anywhere else in Cameroon? And then the answer becomes yes. And then you also have to show there's two ways that you can win asylum. One is called past persecution. So if you've had no past persecution whatsoever and you're an Anglophone, and this is what happened with a lot of people coming across the border. I was shocked at how little prepared they were for asylum when they came across the border, some of these people. And usually they got attorneys at the border who didn't know really what they were doing, in my opinion, for the most part. So they would come in, they'd say, oh, I'm afraid because if I go back home, they're killing Anglophones. And I'm afraid because they think I'm an Amber boy. I'm a separatist, they think, but I'm not. I'm not really political. I'm not SCNC. I'm not political. I just happen to be in the wrong place at the wrong time, basically is what they were saying. Well, that's a losing argument. If there ever was one, that's not going to win asylum. So, and you're stuck with a lot of things that they've said at the border there in the record. So you're stuck with that record and you have to fix that record. A good lawyer tries to work with the client to figure out what else is there that we can use. Some lawyers just take what's there.
Danielle, let me follow with this question. The United States just commemorated its independence against the UK, Britain. Anglophone Cameroonians, those fighting to separate from the rest of the country, they say that there are cases of, there is genocide and they are fighting for independence. Why is fighting for independence by Anglophone Cameroonians not a strong case to win asylum when that's how your people won independence from Britain?
Yeah, the irony of it all, right? So the thing is, okay, so you exactly hit the hammer on the nail there, because if indeed you're fighting, or a lot of Cameroonians will say when they testify or they're talking, they'll say, I'm a militant. I'm an activist militant. Well, militant in the US doesn't mean what militant means necessarily in Cameroon. So militant means you take arms or you fight with violence. So yes, if you're fighting like Amber Boys, anybody who'd be an Amber Boy would automatically be barred from asylum. That's an automatic bar because you use violence. So anytime you use any kind of violence, that is an automatic bar from asylum. So to go back to your question is, why is it okay for the US to do that to get their freedom, but not Cameroon? Well, okay, first of all, U.S. was in a completely different situation. They weren't asking another country to give us freedom. We fought for our freedom, and long before I existed, but that's how it was obtained. So I think every country has armed conflict when it actually gets independence from its tyranny or whoever they consider it shouldn't be. So I think it's a very different situation, because here you're asking the US to give protection to someone for fighting their country. So no, you're not allowed to be a Nazi. You're not allowed to be a communist. You're not allowed to be someone who has taken arms, and you're not allowed to fight, against the US. But I wanted to also bring up one issue that you mentioned twice today, and that was about, people are fleeing from cats, fleeing from this, fleeing from that. Okay, so I was just recently in Quebec City, and there by the water, I saw a huge wall of life jackets. First I thought, okay, who's putting life jackets all over the wall? That makes no sense. Then I found out it was a piece of art, I guess, that some Chinese person had put there, which was a statement on human rights, saying that, think of all the people who have drowned coming over in ships, such as from Haiti. I mean, if you remember, there was a huge influx saying we should bring in the boat people, let them in, give them status. But that never happened, right? So yes, it's the fleeing from the country is something that U.S. has always said. That's what the Statue of Liberty represents. Give me your poor, your huddled masses. That's what it says, right? So, but it doesn't really mean you can come in anyway just because you had problems in your country. So you have to, asylum has very specific requirements, very specific statutes, and some things work and some things don't. So if you're not very, very familiar with asylum, which most people aren't, they come across the border and they tell a story. You might get asylum if you have the right story that meets all those components, but likely most of you aren't going to. So I saw lately the percentage of people from Cameroon who were getting asylum since coming across the border was a lot of denials, like 80%.
80%, that's a huge number.
Yeah.
What were the arguments that led to 80% denial?
Well, most of them didn't have a story. First of all, asylum is based on 1 of 5 grounds. So you have to either have race, religion, a particular social group, which Anglophones you could argue is, but particular social groups is the hardest one to win. So being a homosexual or lesbian or LGBT, that can be a ground for asylum. All right, especially in Cameroon, because you have that law that persecutes anyone who is LGBT. The other one is which one did I miss? Race, religion, political, national origin, and I think I hit them all. If it's not fitting into one of those, and it's not on account of or because of one of those, so you come in here and you say, I'm not political. They came to my farm and they thought I was active with the Amber Boys. That's a losing argument, because you're not political. So which ground do you fit in? You're not religion. It's not particular social group. You just, it's random. And random is good for TPS, not good for asylum.
Very important questions I've had a lot of people ask that I ask you. You've heard claims of genocide in the Anglophone Cameroon. Does the killing, or do the killings rise to the level of genocide in American law? That should lead to the granting of asylum, political asylum, fleeing from it.
Mm-hmm. So I don't know that there is a platform or crystal ceiling for genocide that you say, okay, if this many people got killed or this many people had their hands chopped off or their heads chopped off, that's genocide. Clearly in Rwanda, it was genocide. I mean, you saw masses of people killed. You don't see that in Cameroon. What you see is villages burned and a lot of people are killed. But then people tell me, oh, I live in Yaoundé or I live in Douala and I don't have any problems. So it doesn't seem to be quite countrywide, right? So I don't think that the level in Cameroon, according to U.S. is anywhere close to genocide at this point now. Could it become more so? I mean, I doubt Cameroon is really that interested in killing all the Anglophones. They're about 50% of the population, aren't they? I mean, I don't know what the percentage is, but they're not going to kill off. They're not a small minority. So, you know, and Bia's what, 95 going on 120 or something. I don't know. So I don't know that it may be that all plays into whether TPS is going to be renewed. My own feeling is 18 months from now, probably it'll be renewed because I don't think things are going to change in 18 months. On the other hand, suppose that Bia dies and someone very democratic comes in. So, for example, Ivory Coast, Houphouët Boigny, who is considered sort of a dictator. You get in Gbagbo, and Gbagbo is considered, oh, he's the opposition. He's great. He's wonderful. Okay, he commits as many human rights abuses now, they say, as other people did. But so it's very, you know, it's very tenuous, the thread, because it depends what the reporters or the rapporteurs say about that country and what gets reported to the embassy, to the State Department, and things like that as to what abuses are. So I think it's very important that Cameroonians continue to advocate that there are a lot of problems so that TPS does get renewed. I don't think people should sit back on their laurels and say, oh, we have TPS, it'll automatically be renewed. I don't think that's at all a given. But I think it probably will.
You are watching Voices of Africa on the platform Chatnite Africa. My name is Divine Nchamukong. My guest today is one of the leading U.S. attorneys in immigration law, and from the depths of her knowledge, you can tell that she understands what she's talking about. She's dealt with a lot of Africans, and a lot of her clients are Cameroonians.
We love Chatnite Africa. Keep watching Chatnite Africa.
Danielle, if somebody came to you having fled from Cameroon and claimed that the Amber boys, you know who Amazonians are, when you apply for asylum, you have to declare that you're running from a country. Now, these fighters don't recognize Cameroon as a country. How do you take that case in court to represent somebody who has to apply for asylum and yet doesn't agree or accept or acknowledge that he's from Cameroon? How do you handle that?
It's not in the eyes of the beholder, first of all. So it's in the eyes of the U.S. If that person carries a Cameroonian passport, as far as the U.S. is concerned, they're a U.S. citizen, they're Cameroonian. And if they have a birth certificate born in Cameroon, they may or may not be Cameroonian. So a birth certificate alone does not prove that you're Cameroonian. But here's another important point that you sort of alluded to in a way. So say you're getting TPS and you came in illegally. You came in across the border illegally and you didn't get asylum. And you're now married to a U.S. citizen and you get your approved I-130. I had this recently. In fact, I have a lot of this recently. So you've gotten approved, you have U.S. citizen kids, and you're like, okay, now I can file for the green card, right? In court. And the answer is no, you can't, because you came in across illegally and you're not admissible. So TPS is a perfect solution for that person, because that person can then leave the country now with what happened July 1st and the vacating of ZRZC. But here's the problem. Okay, they leave Cameroon, they go for a few days to Canada, they come back, they're admitted, and they're now admitted in the status as advanced parole. Therefore, they can now file for a green card based on their spouse. If, I mean, there's a lot of ifs here involved, so it's more complex than this. But how does the person get the passport? They've been here for years. And I've been told by Cameroonians, and I'm not sure if it's true, I've been told that if you're illegally here in the US, you cannot renew your Cameroonian passport. Well, you can't travel with advanced parole without a national document. So you have to have either a refugee status, which if you haven't won asylum, you can't get, or a passport. So if you can't get a passport, how do you leave the country and come back? You can't. So that's one problem. The second problem is you obviously can't go back to Cameroon because that's not what asylum or TPS is for. And then the third problem is if indeed the Cameroonian government is not giving Cameroonian passports to people who are illegally here, which some countries do that, why is it that all during the Trump administration, ICE made a deal with Cameroonian government and said, we will impose sanctions on you unless you give us those passports or laissez-passer so that we can put your people on a plane and ship them back home because we do not believe they belong here at this point in time. Why were they giving it to ICE if they're not going to give it to their own nationals? So it raises a lot of questions for me. So somebody needs to talk to the embassy and do something about that. And not me. That has to be a Cameroonian involvement, political involvement, I think.
How many Cameroonian clients do you work with?
So, immigration is episodic to a certain degree. So when I started 30 years ago, I had mostly professors from DRC. I speak French fluently, so I had a lot of DRC people, a lot of Nigerians, mostly high political officials, people who sometimes didn't want to go back after their embassy tour here. I still do some people occasionally from Cameroon, but it's not very common.
Oftentimes, oftentimes the point gotten. Oftentimes, a lot of immigrants come from Africa hoping, and not only Africa, Hispanic world, Afghanistan, and so on, hoping that by coming here illegally and getting married to a U.S. citizen, that facilitates or fast tracks their dossier, their files to becoming a U.S. citizen or a green card holder. Is that the case?
So marriage to a U.S. citizen is helpful in certain circumstances. And I always tell my clients, I say, being married to a U.S. citizen is the quickest way to get a green card. And it's always sometimes the slowest way. So if it's a good marriage and you have kids with that person and not kids with someone else while you're married to that person, which happens very often, believe me, and you are living with that person and you get a petition approved, that can be helpful. But say for my client that I just had a month ago, he had that situation. We did his I-130 approval. He had a horrible case, I thought, for asylum because he lived in different countries. And I did it basically because I felt like I knew the judge, and I knew the judge would be very sympathetic if he was on the fence about granting asylum, and he'd say, oh, yeah, but he has a U.S. family here. So, I'm going to give him the benefit of the doubt. So, but as it turned out, the judge loved my asylum case. We had worked a lot on it, and he granted it. So I was very happy. But, the other reason that you might do it is so people get deported. So that's a misunderstood term. Deported doesn't mean you actually had to leave the country. It means that a judge ordered that you were denied your case and you didn't appeal, or you appealed and the board agreed with the judge. That's a deportation order. So it becomes final because you don't leave. So what happens to those people is they issue a warrant for your arrest. Now, the question is, some people say, well, I've been here 5 years, 10 years, no one's picked me up. The warrant for arrest is there. It's just they don't have the manpower and the people to come pick you up. If that becomes a priority in the government, they will pick you up. And I've seen it through the years. So those people I've been very successful with, especially prior to in the Obama era. I would work with the government and we'd do joint motions to reopen. And we'd reopen their case, dismiss their proceedings, and then they would get a green card. So after 20 years, that person, and I just had a lady like this, and she was actually from Togo. She wasn't from Cameroon, but she was so excited. She goes, this is the first time in 20 years I can tell my kids and my husband, and they were all crying, that I'm legal. You know, I've been here so long and now I'm finally legal. So for those people, it might be good to be married to an American and have to reopen your case. It also could be good if here's another example. Say you filed for affirmative asylum, and affirmative asylum means you came in legally on a visitor's visa or some other kind of visa, not across the border, and you applied for asylum, and you're waiting for an interview at the asylum office. Those people, unfortunately, and I don't need to go into the reasons, but there are specific reasons why this happened. They have been stuck in a backlog. So there are people who have filed for asylum in 215 who still haven't been interviewed. They get their work permit every 2 years, good for 2 years, but they can't get a green card. They can't travel. They can't accumulate time towards citizenship or green card or anything. So those people I highly recommend, and many I have done, is while they're pending their asylum and they've come in, they can go ahead and marry an American if they're involved with somebody, and they can get their green card in a year, and they don't have to sit in that queue. That queue right now is 1.7 million long. That is a long queue. There are 8 asylum offices in the US. Each office has up to maybe 30 people working. And some of those people are at the border, about half of them. So if you do the math, you can figure out for yourself that probably you're not going to be interviewed anytime soon. Now, there's a lottery, so sometimes people by random get picked out. But there's lots of reasons why it might be good to marry an American. What is not good, and I'm going to say this very unequivocally, is to marry an American because you want to get a green card and you're not living with them and you have no intention of living with them and it's not a real marriage.
How does the court know that?
Many fraud issues.
How does the court know that?
Okay, this is in Africa. So the court knows that through many, many systems. So they have a very technical LexisNexis type system where they can tell, one, where are you taking your money out of the bank? Where's your lease? Does your wife have a lease somewhere else in another state or another country or another part of the state? You got a traffic ticket the other day. What address did your wife or you put on that traffic ticket? Your cell phone. What address do you use for your credit? You applied for a credit card. What address did you use on that credit card application? Okay. And then I had a lady the other day, I took her in for naturalization. And this is always a dangerous question. They asked her, they said, have you been back to Cameroon? And she said, no, I have not. You know, because she knew as an asylee, she was not supposed to go back till she became a citizen. They asked her again. They said, are you sure? Because we have proof you have. And she said, no, that's not possible because I haven't. So I got her out afterwards and I said to her, you're going to be denied because you've definitely gone back. They didn't ask that question for nothing. And sure enough, we got this huge intent to revoke and we had to appeal and we won. But we came up with some really creative arguments why she lied, because she had gone, but she said, well, I bought my ticket, to go to Cameroon, but who would know I bought a ticket? No one's going to know that. I said, of course they're going to know that. They see your credit card check. They can check everything they want. Facebook, perfect. They have access to Facebook. They have access to, I probably shouldn't be talking on Facebook today, should I? I mean, all right. So they know what's going on. They know what people are saying. They know the government is not dumb. Now, sometimes I feel like they missed a lot of things, but if they want to check and you have a diligent officer, they're going to check and they're going to know. And then children, that's the big one. People have children. They don't declare those children on their application forms. But of course, hospital records show that you had a child. And, I had a client one time, we went in and they said, well, who are these 2 children? And he said, they're my brother's kids. And as soon as he said that, I took him out afterwards. And I said, do you have kids? These are your kids? Yes, but I didn't tell you because I didn't think anyone would know. This was a doctor, for God's sake, a medical doctor. And I said, how did you think they wouldn't know?
You're listening to some crazy stories out there, Danielle. We will be right back. Some people are already sending in some questions. You're watching Voices of Africa. We'll be right back after this little transition. Stay tuned. My name is Divine Chamaka.
Chatnite Africa, 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 Chatnite Africa. Chatnite Africa. Africa by continent. Africa is a beautiful place. Chatnite Africa promotes Afrocentric solutions to Africans' challenges.
This is Chatnite Africa, and the broadcast is Voices of Africa. In just a moment, we are going to bring on Danielle Beach, who is one of the leading attorneys, immigration attorneys in the United States. My name is Divine Chamaka. This broadcast is going on live simultaneously on YouTube, the internet, www.chatniteafrica.net. It's on Facebook, our broadcast page, followed by thousands of Africans across Africa and in the diaspora. It's also going on now live on LinkedIn. Ladies and gentlemen, one more time, Danielle Beach on the platform. Danielle, some questions, and now you can dial the number 240-603-7367. You can dial the number 240-603-7367. If you have a phone, you have a lawyer, and a top-notch lawyer. You have that opportunity now, gentlemen, ladies and gentlemen. Here is a question from Kwan Jacob. There are too many restrictions to the U.S. visa. Are you confirming that?
So first of all, let me say that have a caveat that nothing I say here today should be construed as legal advice on your particular case, unless I am seeing you and consulting with you, because I'm speaking in rather broad, general terms and not giving legal advice to you as your particular case. So, you know, a lot of times people will say, well, I use the same information that my client gave me, what you did for them, and it worked for them. Why didn't it work for me? So every case is different. It doesn't work that way.
Kwan Jacob says, I went for a visa interview, and I was told your salary is too small for us to grant you a visa.
So, okay, I'll answer that question. So basically, that's a good question. So I'm assuming, first of all, that that person, Jacob, did go to an embassy in Yaoundé to get the visa, because visa is sometimes Cameroonians will say visa when they mean adjustment, and they're two different things. So adjustment means here in the US, visa means abroad. So I'm assuming that person actually was abroad. So if they were abroad, and even if they were here for adjustment, there's a requirement to get a green card that your petitioner, whoever that petitioner is, must make a certain amount of money, depending on, one, how many people they have sponsored on a affidavit support, two, how many people are in your household. So the amount varies according to that amount. So if you don't make enough, you're not going to be granted a visa. And they look at your W-2s, they look at your tax returns. So what's the big problem here? A lot of people don't claim everything they make on their tax returns or W-2s, and therefore they're short, and therefore they're not going to be eligible.
Here is, yeah, go ahead.
So that's the short answer to that. So that's, I mean, typically before I do a case, I look at all the possible negatives, and we try to anticipate those so that by the time, you know, we're filing and the time we go to the interview, we have all those bases covered. So yeah, I mean, they shouldn't be finding that out when you go to get the visa. That's ridiculous. I mean, I don't even know how that happened. You must have done it yourself. But
Here
if
is
you
a
have
question.
a lawyer, that shouldn't happen.
Here is a question from Shea Tata Ate. What if you are genuinely married, your marriage is approved and you have 130? You know what 130 means? Then your wife divorces you. Are you still on track to get a green card if you had a divorce in the process when you had been married?
So I'm going to take that specific example and then I'm going to vary it slightly. So I had a person whose I-130 was denied and we appealed it. On appeal, it was approved. And then I called her very happy that we had been able to reverse it on appeal. And she said, oh, but my husband filed divorce for me. And I said, oh, well, that's the end of that petition then, because they will know. If you file a divorce, obviously they're going to know. So that's what happened. The next thing we got about 2 or 3 months later was they were revoking the I-130 because they were now divorced. So if you divorce, it doesn't necessarily revoke the I-130. So in that case, the appeal had gotten the I-130 to go back to get it approved. But if your I-130 is approved, typically, then if your wife divorces you, what happens is, number one, you're not going to be able to apply for the green card. You're not going to get the green card based on that. But you have an approved I-130. Now, that I-130 means that if you marry another American, you're not going to be subject to the 204C bar for fraud. So you're not going to be subject to fraud issues. So that's a good thing. But you can't get the green card through that particular spouse if you're divorced. If you have an approved I-130 and your wife divorces that you committed fraud or something, that could be a different situation. So it depends what the basis of divorce was, or if they annul the marriage, then that I-130 would, but an I-130 alone doesn't do you usually a whole lot of good. It doesn't necessarily give you a green card.
Another question just sent to me by text. By the way, you can dial the number 240-603-7367. Let me repeat, 240-603-7367, or simply text me the question. The question just sent to me by text is, if you came in on a student visa, can you apply for a work permit or a green card?
So that's an interesting question too. So if you come in on an F1 is a student visa. It's a non-immigrant visa. It does not lead to you can apply at normally I'll give you the rules as they were and the rules as they are now. So TPS has changed for F1 some of the things. So you used to have to show that you'd been in good standing at the school for 1 year, and then you could work for up to 20 hours on campus. Now, with TPS for Cameroonians, they've said, we're going to make that much more generous. We're going to say, if you're facing a hardship or economic hardship, which actually technically was always there, then you're going to be eligible for a work permit. So they're giving work permits much more easily to F1s who are Cameroonians. That's the short answer. But to go to a more complex question that was not asked is, if you have an F1, how then do you get a green card? Well, the answer is you apply, you get a job offer, and then you apply for an H-1B, or you get a job offer and then you apply for a perm. So as long as you stay in status, like on OPT or something else, we've even had people who applied for extraordinary ability. And that means you can self-sponsor, but extraordinary ability does not mean you have a PhD. So please do not call me and say, I have PhD, I'm extraordinary ability. That does not at all what it means. So extraordinary ability is much more than just your educational qualifications.
Another question, are there situations or circumstances when a green card or even a citizenship can be revoked?
So to revoke citizenship is much more difficult than to revoke a green card. So to revoke citizenship, basically they have to show fraud. and they have to take it to U.S. District Court to take away your citizenship. I know that there are revocation. In Trump's era, they were seriously talking about doing a lot of these, and they were going to install and have a whole system of going back and finding these cases and doing that. Some cases are revoked, and some of that happens. I had for a time period in Fairfax a number of them that were revoked because they actually had a employee who was very high up who had was not having people interviewed properly through the system, and they were getting citizenship, and mostly Chinese, and so those were all revoked. But usually it's especially if it's been more than 5 years, it's pretty hard to take away citizenship. It can be done though. As far as green cards, that isn't that difficult to revoke. So for example, and I don't want to get too technical here, but asylum applicants who apply and they came in illegally and they applied for a green card and they got the green card, but then they apply for citizenship and they get denied the green card, the citizenship, because they told they shouldn't have gotten the green card, but immigration gave them the green card. Those people didn't apply for a waiver, which they were required to do, which because you don't get an interview for asylum green cards, they didn't catch, but then they can't become citizens. And some offices are super strict on that and follow it to the letter of the law, like Fairfax. Some offices are not as strict about it, and some people get through. But for revocation of green card, you commit a crime, your green card can be revoked. So criminal issue, fraud issues, terrorism issues, there's a lot of inadmissibility issues that you can have your green card revoked. And sometimes there's relief for that.
Another question, can issues other than criminal matters affect my citizenship, such as entering on a false passport if I got asylum?
Yes. I have a guy who's applied 3 times for citizenship, and they don't want to give him citizenship. And the only reason now that they're giving, though they had a lot of other reasons, which we eliminated, is because he came in on a false passport, and they said on the green card, he didn't say that he used a false passport, even though he testified in court about the false entry and using his dad's passport. But they won't give him citizenship because of that. So yes, you can.
I remember a case which a former warlord in Africa is now having trouble in the United States with his status because he did not declare what was needed to be known about him. What's your comment on that?
So I'm not familiar with that particular case, but yes, it's like the Nazi cases, people who, have been Nazis in the past, and maybe they didn't know when they went to the interview and they got green cards or they got citizenship. Those will be revoked, and they won't hesitate to go after those people. So a warlord, yes. Someone who was taken to the Hague for human rights abuses, yes. Anyone who's committed any kind of terrorism or human rights abuses, ICE loves those people. They love going after them. So to them, that's like an interesting case, and they really get into that. So yeah, they will, if they know about that and they can find out about it, they will go after that.
The Cuba patients writes, how long does it take for an adoption process to go through, and why do they ask for proof of continuous 2 years of living with the child at the same address?
I love that question because I get it almost every day. So the answer is there are different ways to adopt kids. So one, you can adopt kids through the Hague Convention for countries that are eligible, and you're adopting an orphan. So there's different rules when you adopt an orphan than rules when you adopt your brothers or sisters or other relatives or a child that you knew that has been living with you that you want to adopt. So different rules. So the one you're talking about is the second one that I mentioned. So I don't think Cameroonians are the only people that do this, but certainly they do this a lot. is they, once they get their status here, or even before they get their status, sometimes I see it on their asylum applications. They list their brothers or their sisters or their sisters' children or their brother's children as their children, because maybe their brother died and he left the children to them and they have lived with them and they consider them their children. Well, by American laws, they are not. So you have to adopt a child before that child turns 16. Number one, you have to adopt that child at the proper court, which a lot of times doesn't happen in Cameroon. It's at the wrong court. Thirdly, you have to have lived, and that's what you're referring to, 24 months continuous presence. So it doesn't have to be 24 months consecutive. It can be 24 months intermittently. But you do have to have that 24 months. So the reason this comes up a lot is because they don't really want people to bring in what Trump called chain migration. But this is more than chain migration. This is people who haven't, they're not your relatives. They're people that you want to bring in because they're your family. So they have very strict rules about that. And the rules say you have to have lived with that child for 24 months before you came here. So people come here all the time in my office. They say, I want to adopt my niece or nephew. I want to bring them in. I say, did you live with that niece or nephew for 24 months before you came here? Or are you willing to go back and live for 24 months with that kid? Usually the answer is, no, I have a job here. I can go back for 3 weeks, and then maybe go back for 3 weeks in a year from now or something, but I can't do that. So I say, well, probably not any point in adopting because you're probably not going to succeed. So I don't like people to waste their time and money and just try something that probably won't work. So yes, I think the 24 months continuous residency, I used to think it was this kind of an unfair rule, but I've come to believe that it has a purpose because it's not made, if you get asylum, it's not made for you to bring in your brothers and sisters' children. It's made for you to bring in your own biological children. So by the way, we just had a guy, we did consular processing. He insisted these 2 kids were his. We found out because the embassy asked for DNA tests. One of them was not his. That one is not going to be able to come in. It's very sad because that kid probably doesn't know that he's not really his father's kid. And the father sure didn't know. He thought it was his kid because I told him we're going to do DNA tests. And he said, absolutely, it's my kid. Usually when I say that to clients, they'll say, oh, I'm not sure it's my kid. Let's not go further. So, sometimes you get surprised.
Another question. This is getting really, really interesting. Another question, if I have to bring in my fiancé, how do I do this? And this is very important because lots of people here, guys here, they go back home and contract marriages or have fiancés to bring, or even women. How do they go about this? And how long would it take? 1, if you're a green card holder. Number 2, if you're a citizen of the United States.
Okay, so that answers, you can't do it if you have a green card. You can't bring in a fiancé. You have to be a citizen. Secondly, to bring in a fiancé used to be less difficult than it's become because if you remember in a lot of the terrorist attacks, a lot of these people had come in on fiancé visas. So they've gotten very strict on those. And fiancé visa, you do a fiancé visa, and then when you come in, you have 90 days to get married. So what if the person who brings you in says, okay, I brought you here, but I don't want to marry you now. Or I don't think this marriage is going to work. Or I have another girlfriend here. So, so that's the problem with fiancé visas. It often the person who's the victim is the person who came over and didn't realize what situation they were coming into. And I've had horrific situations where people said, he made me do all the washing, cleaning for him and his girlfriend. And I was treated like a slave. So, sometimes you don't know what you're coming to, right? So that's the problem with fiancé visas. Green cards, you can file for someone, but if you file for someone, you have a green card. So again, this varies again from who's president, what the administration is. Typically, the rule is it's not an immediate relative. You're not eligible for a green card. You can get an I-130 approved, but not a green card. There's exceptions to that. The exceptions are if you remained in status continuously without any lapse. That's not often the case with most of the people I see. Most of the people, they have their visitor's visa expired, or their OPT expired, or their F1 expired, or something expired. So then that person is not eligible for a green card based on a green card holder.
Maybe two last questions before we go. What about the 131 application? Is it I-131? I don't know. Applications for siblings. How long is that? If the question makes sense.
So I think maybe whoever is giving me that question is not using the right form application. So an I-131 is a travel document application. So there's no travel document application for siblings. You can file an I-130 for a sibling, and that is currently a wait of about 12 to 15 years. And if your sibling is living here in the United States, it's kind of like winning the lottery and being here in the United States, you're out of luck.
Another question, perhaps the last one, if we don't have any phone calls coming in. It's sent from Mali. A French citizen was waived his rights to enter the US through the ESTA program, the ESTA program, because he made an omission when filing a subsequent ESTA as he was arrested, as he fought with someone in the United States. He applied for a visa and it was denied. How would he go about to re-enter the United States or for visit if he's waived from ESTA and denied a tourist visa? I'm just reading. I didn't go through the question, so I'm reading it as
I understand the question. A good question. So ESTA is a very privileged status. It's like having a global entry pass. You have to meet certain criteria. ESTA is really for people from only certain countries, typically European countries or countries that are granted that privilege. So with an ESTA, you have very strict requirements. As you do with any visitor's visa, you cannot commit a crime. You cannot hide crimes. You cannot hide change of names in your country or here. You cannot have committed fraud. You cannot, interesting one here, which most people don't think of. I'll give you an example. People come in here, they have CDs. Maybe I'm giving you examples of clients I've had. They won't know who. So they have CDs because they're a famous musician back home. And they say, okay, I'm here on a visitor's visa, but I'm going to sell my CDs. I'm going to have concerts and I'm going to sell my CDs. You have way violated your ESTA and your visitor's visa. And if they find out, which they probably will, you will never get another ESTA and you probably won't get another visitor's visa. The only way to get around that is to file what's called a waiver. The waiver is quite difficult to get. It has to be granted by Customs and Border Patrol, but I do those. There's a non-immigrant waiver and there's an immigrant waiver. They're different requirements. They're kind of hard to get, though.
Dr. Nicolas Santo is asking me to extend his very warm regards to you.
I saw that. Good to see you.
Very good. Before we go, as I said from the start, there are lots of people wrote to me a lot, asking me to ask you the question, what's the easiest way to leave Africa and come to the United States? I don't know if you can answer that question, but I had that question repeatedly asked me by text. You have a word on that? Can somebody leave Africa because of economic hardship and apply for visa to come to the United States for a better life?
No.
Basically, that's it.
No.
The answer is no, a quick one.
No. But I mean, say you have a serious illness and maybe some kind of serious cancer, and you've gotten Johns Hopkins to accept you, and you have medical records from both your doctors in Africa and from here saying that, you need this surgery and stuff like that. There's what's called humanitarian parole. So those people sometimes can come in for the purposes of that particular reason. But you can't just come here. So there's many other ways to come. I mean, I'd say the best way to come here and be legal is come in legally and stay legal. So do an employment-based visa, do your research before, or, a lot of people from home countries. I just had yesterday a long discussion with 3 Russians on Zoom. So it's pretty easy to talk to people from other countries on Zoom now. And, you can bring people in on different kinds of visas if they're eligible. So the best way to come in is legally. And the best way to stay here is to remain legal and not commit a crime. Now, that being
And
said, not everybody can do that.
I have greetings for you being sent by Phil Davis. Hi, Danielle. My regards. Best of all times. I had a lady who wrote to me, Divine, I am in the United States and not sent back home on deportation thanks to this white lady, Danielle Beach. She adores you. She prefers to remain anonymous, so I'll keep her anonymous. But know that you have a lot of admirers. Why do some people just lose their cases in court? Is it lack of preparedness by the lawyer, or what is it?
I think there's a combination of lots of factors, but ultimately it's the lawyers they hire. Lawyers in immigration don't make a lot of money compared to other areas of law. So it's bulk practice. So many immigration lawyers are more interested in just taking the case, getting it to court. And sometimes they don't have a lot of time either because the judge doesn't give them a lot of time. So it's experience. So knowing how to present a case in a way that has a chance of winning, knowing your judge, which here I know most of the judges. So lately they have a lot of new judges. Knowing what will win and what won't win in the law. That's very important because sometimes clients tell me these great stories and they think they're wonderful. And I say, that story is not going to win. So let me ask you more questions to see if you have a winning. And sometimes they have a great story, to tell, which they didn't tell me because they didn't think it was important. And the other thing is not everybody has to file asylum. In Cameroon, it's become kind of a catch-all, but there's lots of other ways to get green cards. And there are many things that I talk to clients about every day, and they say, I didn't even know that existed. Oh, really? I can do that? Oh, that will help me get green cards so that, and make sure that a lawyer is interested in you and you in person, what your particular case is, because what the recommendation for 2 people in the same country won't be the same depending on your circumstances. So it has to be fact specific and case specific. So make sure that your attorney isn't just saying, yeah, of course I can do that. So I tend to tell a lot of people I say, you shouldn't do this because it's not going to work. So, you want a lawyer who's going to be honest with you. It's better to hear negative news and be honest than to just say, oh, of course it's going to win. And then you're all disappointed.
I cannot listen to this great lawyering, if I may say, great presentation without asking how people can contact you. Danielle, if somebody wanted to contact you, how did they do it?
So you could put my webpage up there. They can contact me through calling our office. I'm pretty booked up, usually about 2 to 3 months ahead. So if you have a deadline, like a circuit court brief that has to be filed or something, you need to say it's an urgent, decision matter. Emailing me is always the best, honestly. And you don't have my address posted or my email, but you might want to post that so that people have access to that.
I will do that. I will do that immediately after this broadcast.
If they email me personally, I will read every email. If I don't respond, it means it went to spam and I didn't see it, or I didn't, I missed it. But, call the office. But the best way is to email me personally, especially if you have a quick deadline. If it's just something that can wait, you call the office, you make an appointment, and I'm in the office in person certain days, and some days I do Zooms from home. So depends on what your need is. Yeah. So I would give them, my phone number is 202-331-3074. That's the office number. My email is dbeach, DBEACH at beach, BEACH -Oswald, .com. And then we have a website. We put out newsletters every month. And if you go to our website, which we're updating, but you'll see our newsletter, and you can read the newsletter, or you can ask for the latest newsletter. It always has the latest news. And there's a lot of articles in there, which may or may not be, but it's all the news that's coming out in immigration, and it's free.
The platform.
So thank you for having me, Divine. I appreciate it.
No, you're not going yet. You're not going yet.
It's been a great service. Oh, okay.
You're not going yet. The platform, Chatnite Africa, the broadcast, Voices of Africa.
We love Chatnite Africa. Keep watching Chatnite Africa.
And before we go, we are going to ask for the last word from Danielle Beach. Your last word, ma'am.
So my last word would be, don't be in a rush to do things. So many times I see Cameroonians and they say, oh, if I'd only known you before, or if I could have gotten in to see you, but you were booked, or if I hadn't have been in such a rush. So it's not so important that your case gets done so very quickly. It's important that it gets done well and you win, because you only get one chance to win. And the more times you lose, the less chance you have of ever winning. So do it right, and do it right the first time, because once you break the pot of milk, it's very hard to fix and put the pieces back together. And people spend a lot more money trying to do that. And I do specialize in that, but it's not my favorite area, because sometimes it's people who have been here for 20, 30 years and they've never been able to get green cards. So, and mostly because they had lawyers who just didn't care and didn't do a good job. So
that's the last word from Danielle Beach. Danielle, we thank you for coming for the first time on Voices of Africa. I keep saying Voices of Africa, not for Africans only. Thank you so much, and extend my very warm regards to your family.
Thank you very much, Divine, and thank you for all of those of you who listened. And I look forward to hearing from you if you feel like you need my services or you want to contact me. And Divine will provide you with all of that shortly.
Most definitely.
All right. Thank you.
And viewers, that's where we wrap up this. But before we go, this broadcast is now on YouTube. It's been on YouTube since it began. It's on our website, www.chatniteafrica.net. I also want to thank all the people who contribute for us to build this platform to look the way it is. If you're looking for instructive content, if you're looking for exhilarating content, we don't come here to talk mundane things or lewd stuff. This is the platform not for Africans only. My name is Sir Divine Chamukong. Thank you for watching. I want to thank my broadcast producer and social media platforms manager, Roger Fool, currently producing this program live in Lagos, Nigeria. I want to also thank Mr. Mumbalingwa in Chicago, who is my director of transmission. I want to also thank Mr. Lambert Mbom, through whom I could get the connection with this renowned lawyer in the Washington, D.C. metropolitan area. If you feel like you want to support us build this platform, go even bigger, please contact me. We'd be grateful to have your help. The only help we don't want is help which comes with strings attached. In other words, you give us assistance, but say we cannot take this content or we cannot take that content. Thank you again for watching. This has been Voices of Africa on the platform Chatnite Africa, live from Washington, D.C. metropolis. Bye for now.
I'm coming back. I'm coming back. I'm coming to get down. I'm coming to dance, We're gonna dance, we're gonna get down,